Hello and welcome back to part three of Chatterbox, where Carl and I are joined by legendary fight sports broadcaster Ariel Helwani. Welcome to Chatterbox, Ariel.
Legendary. Wow. I appreciate that. I was
Yeah.
wondering if you guys were going to have me on after I, kind of squashed all of Carl's, rankings the last time we spoke and sort of embarrassed him with some of my hot takes. So I appreciate you guys having me on 4 months later.
Do you know what? It's the redemption arc for Carl. That we're absolutely fine with it. Now,
I embarrass myself every day, Ariel, so don't worry about
it. Yeah, it's the usual thing for Carl. Now, we've already talked about Joe Joyce's shock defeat to Zhilei Zhang, but I'd like to get your take on it, Eric.
Oh my gosh, it was quite shocking. Actually, I rate Zhang pretty high. He trains not too far from where I live here, and I think he's super tough. Actually thought he may have won his last fight, and I was wondering if Joyce was looking past him. This was a very dangerous fight, a fight that some people thought he shouldn't have taken because he was so close to getting that really big fight next, whether it's against a Fury or Usyk, etc. And it just kind of felt to me like he was very relaxed. And I know he's a mild-mannered, soft-spoken guy, but I just didn't know if he was giving Zhang the proper respect going into this one. And then we saw what happened on Saturday, and I thought it was a virtuoso performance from Zhang. I said on Twitter, I think that version of Zhang beats the Anthony Joshua that we saw a few weeks ago at the O2. Joyce will be back, and I think he'll have some big fights on the horizon, but this is a massive step back for him on the verge of the biggest payday, the biggest fight of his career.
You know, we focused a lot on Joyce and, how he was going into the fight, what he did in the ring, but you got to give credit to Zhang, who really did announce himself as one of the main players in the heavyweight division just shy of his 40th birthday.
He was the B-side last week, and I felt like he was the star of the week. The press conferences, everything that he was doing was just very fun. The stuff that he was doing with you guys at BT was very fun as well. Big shout out to Big John. So all week long, it seemed like he was just owning the moment. And then the performance itself, I mean, the left hand was incredible. He's like a super heavyweight, but he looked like the faster, crisper boxer. I think most of us were expecting Joyce to be that guy. And so, yeah, I mean, he really owned it. And now, to your point, now he's setting himself up for a big fight. We suspect Dubois Usyk, but does he slide in there and fight one of these, big names next? Is he fighting a Joshua? Is he fighting one of these guys? I don't see why not. He's a guy with a large following who comes from China. Obviously, anyone who comes from there, especially with his stature and size, could do some big business. So he has set himself up for a massive back end of 2023.
When you look at the big names in the heavyweight division now, you've got Zhang at 39, Wilder's 37, Usyk's 36, Fury's 34, Ruiz 33. I think AJ is also 33. It's not a young man's game at the top anymore.
No, it isn't. But there's still, opportunities for people to make some noise. And honestly, at heavyweight, historically, you probably have a bit of a longer shelf life. Of course, George Foreman, 45 years old, won the heavyweight title way back when, I think in 1994 off the top of my head. So you typically are able to stick around a little longer at heavyweight despite the big shots that they're taking. And for me right now, it's wide open. If we get into the Tank Garcia stuff, the heavyweights are on notice. It's embarrassing what has happened with the heavyweight division. Like, they were right there to bring it all the way back with Fury and Usyk, and the way they fumbled that, and it's no disrespect to Dubois or anyone else, but the fight that we wanted to see that was at the goal line, to steal a phrase here in America, an analogy, the fact that they fumbled that is absolutely embarrassing in my opinion, and everyone involved should be embarrassed and ashamed of themselves. So there's all big players, and they're all kind of in their 30s, in their primes, and right now they're not making the big fights. Whether it's Joshua, whether it's Fury, whether it's Usyk, all these guys, they're not making the big fights, and that's embarrassing. And they should look to the women, and they should look to the lightweights as examples as to how you should make the big fights and give the people what they want.
You sound very passionate on that, Ariel, and I am too. I think you're absolutely right, and you've hit the nail on the head that these fights, for the sake of boxing, should be taking place. But the Fury and Usyk fight in particular, that was the one that kind of was a bit of a sickener for everybody. I thought that it was done. I thought that fight was definitely going to happen. I know you says everybody's to blame to some extent, but who you pointing the finger at really in that fight falling through?
Oh, I'm not going to fall for your tricks, Carl. You want the clicker. I wasn't in those rooms, and so that's why you want Helwani blames Fury. Helwani blames Usyk. I don't want that smoke from the big boys. But
Okay.
the truth is, I feel like everyone is to blame. By the way, same thing with Spence and Crawford. I feel like everyone is to blame with that one too. That one
Is that going to happen?
I don't know. Look, I can guarantee you this. This weekend, there's going to be a lot of people watching Tank Davis and Ryan Garcia, aged 28 and 24, who willed networks and promoters into a room and said, we're not leaving until you make this super fight. There was every obstacle imaginable to not make this fight, right? The competing networks, the competing promoters, all that stuff, the undefeated records, their ages, everything imaginable. And they said no. And I actually give Ryan the most amount of credit for that one, for making it happen, but that's besides the point. I bet you there's going to be top fighters, Spence, Crawford, Usyk, Fury, that are going to have FOMO, that are going to say, this should be us. We want this. We want the bright lights of Vegas or London or anywhere else. We should be taking these fights. We should be making these fights happen. They're going to feel like they dropped the ball, like they're on the outside looking in. I bet you, and I bet you this is going to ignite some of these talks again. Does it ultimately lead to a Spence Crawford? It should. Who else are they fighting? Yeah. There's literally no one else on the planet that we want to see those two guys fight, and yet they're not making the fight happen. It drives me insane.
Ariel, I spent a fair bit of time with Devin Haney, a man who knows both those fighters you mentioned very well. He couldn't pick a winner. How do you see that fight going?
God, I cannot wait. This is the fight of the year. And I said it was the fight of the year before even we thought that, Usyk and Fury was going to happen, all that stuff. I cannot wait for this fight for so many reasons. It's hard. My head is saying Davis. My heart is saying Ryan. Typically, Davis likes to start a little slow. I suspect that Ryan Garcia is going to try to start fast. Obviously, he has the height and reach advantage. Early portions of this fight, like rounds 1 through 4, I suspect he will do very well. How does he do in the later rounds? Does Gervonta figure him out, download the information, and maybe knock him out? It's possible, but I'm going to be there in Las Vegas because I couldn't let King Ryan down. I will be there. So after he potentially knocks out Davis, look for me in the front row next to Oscar, next to the Golden Boy, and we might have a nice little moment there. Maybe I'll jump into the ring and we'll hug it out. I don't know. It's still TBD.
I have a take. I have a take on this fight, and I've been asked recently about who do I think wins, and I think Tank is probably the favorite. Tank is probably he's the most explosive fighter that we have since maybe Manny Pacquiao was pretty explosive, but even you go further back to like a prime Mike Tyson. That's when we talk about how explosive Tank is. But he does start slow, and at times he is a little bit lazy. He landed that unbelievable uppercut on Leo Santa Cruz, maybe one of the shots of the century so far. It was an unbelievable shot. But Leo would maybe stole a few rounds on him by just being busier and outworking him. And Leo isn't on Gervonta Davis's level. And I think coaching and their coaches in the corner is going to be really important in this fight. I imagine that Ryan Garcia's tactics will be to punch fast and to punch long and not get caught in that middle distance. And when you're close, you hold on or spoil. But that middle distance is the real danger zone for him. And Joe Goosen in his corner, who I rate as one of the great coaches, I think he will have a very, very important role to play in this fight.
We've got a huge next couple of months of boxing coming up, and one of the fights I want to talk about is Rakhimov against Joe Cordina for the IBF super featherweight title. How do you see that one going? I know Joe Cordina's he's got a bit of a chip on his shoulder about losing that belt.
I love that fight. The next 2 months are going to be great, and Cordina's a lot of fun. Dangerous puncher, a lot of power. I know you said he's got a chip on his shoulder. He's fighting back home, so you suspect that he will rise to the occasion there, and the scenes are going to be great. Man, I would love to go to one of those fights. Might go to the Katie Taylor fight next month. That should be a lot of fun. That should be historic as well. I mean, I'm just so anxious to go to one of these like European. It just seems different, even more so than in Las Vegas.
Can I just say this, Ariel?
Yes.
If you go to a Katie Taylor fight in Dublin, first ever professional fight, and it's a big fight. It's a massive fight. She's gone up a weight division against the best in the weight above. I think quite possibly, and I've been involved in some big atmospheres, and I've been ringside at events with massive atmospheres. That could be, for me, the best atmosphere I've ever been involved in. That's
Wow.
what I'm expecting.
And it's not even happening at Croke Park, which is where we were hoping it was going to happen. 3 Arena. I've only been to Dublin once. I've only been to 3 Arena once, and that was for Conor McGregor's return to Dublin in 2014 against Diego Brandao, the only time he ever fought in the UFC in Ireland. And till this day, guys, that's the greatest atmosphere that I've ever experienced. Any arena, any venue, any stadium, doesn't matter if it's boxing, MMA, pro wrestling, basketball, whatever. And so you saying that kind of gives me chills. And I believe it because of how she is, you know, beloved and respected and admired and idolized in Ireland. So, and by the way, we were talking about not making the big fights. They tried to make the Serrano fight. It was happening. She withdraws. What does she do? She doesn't wait. She doesn't take a tune-up. She doesn't take an easy fight. She goes up to 140 and tries to become undisputed champion over there. I mean, against Chantel Cameron, who's super tough as well. She doesn't have to do that. So yeah, I love everything about that. And there's a bunch of, you know, Lee Wood coming up again. There's just a bunch of big fights in Europe in particular. Not Fury Usyk though. Not Fury Usyk. It's supposed to be next week, Fury Usyk, for goodness sakes.
I know, it's outrageous. This is boxing for you. This is why we love and hate the sport at the same time. Now, one fighter that I really can't fail to mention, who really wasn't hanging around last week, was Denzel Bentley, who produced this spectacular 45-second knockout against Kieran Smith. Let's take a look.
This is another tricky contest tonight against a very tall, rangy opponent who boxes well on that back foot. Good shot! What a punch that
Really
was.
good left hand from Denzel Bentley and a right. Kieran Smith is down. It's all over inside a minute.
You know, he's a fighter that I think he wanted another world title shot, but he's happy to bow to, I guess, public pressure from us boxing fans and sports journalists to fight Hamza Shiraz next. I think that will be an incredible fight of two up-and-coming ferocious boxers.
Yeah, 45 seconds that was. Was that 45 seconds? The prestigious British middleweight title. Very impressive celebration, very impressive power. Yeah, a lot of exciting youngsters. It was a fun card. I was watching you guys on Saturday. Shout out to Big Steve Bunce. Tremendous stuff. Shout out to you, Carl, as well. You look very small next to Steve, just for the record. I don't know if anyone ever told you that.
He always looks
big
so.
Buncey.
I don't know if they do that on purpose. Can they give you like a milk crate or something to stand on?
We need a box.
Geez Louise.
We need a box. I've asked for it so many times. And then to bring in guests like Dillian White was standing beside me. I was sandwiched between Dillian White and Steve Bunce. It just looked ridiculous.
But the coverage is great, and the card was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it very much.
Before we make Carl cry, you know what? Let's take it to part 3. We run out of time for this part, but after the break, we're going to be discussing a potential crossover in fights in terms of boxing and UFC, and we're going to be discussing whether YouTube boxing really is the future of the sport. Stay tuned. We'll be back for part 4. Hello and welcome back to the final part of Chatterbox, where I'm delighted to say we're still joined by Ariel Helwani. And between Ariel and Alex, we've kind of picked the heavyweight division apart. But before we move on to some of the other great fights that we've got coming up, I'd like to tap into your other fight sports knowledge, Ariel. Okay, we've seen a few crossover fights between boxing and UFC over the last few years, but one fight that's been muted is Tyson Fury against Ngannou. Is that a serious proposition?
I mean, I think that Francis really wants it. It doesn't seem like there's any real momentum right now behind that fight. I think he has, maybe resigned to the fact that he could fight maybe a Dillian White or a Deontay Wilder. To me, the best fight for him, if he really wants to like make a splash and jump 2 feet first into the deep end, go with Wilder. Wilder is the closest thing that we have to an MMA heavyweight, meaning he's a little wild, he's not very technical, and they're just going to swing for the fences. Very tough fight. He'll be a massive underdog going into this fight, but that to me is the fight that he should target. I think Tyson would be too fast, too technical, just too difficult for the first go round as a boxer. Yeah. So that's the one. And honestly, I wouldn't even hate if he tried to go for a Dillian White or so. But he told me last time we spoke that he was shooting for summer or late summer or early fall to make this debut. Let's see what happens.
I met him in Vegas when I was training for Taylor McCreary fight, a couple of fights before I packed it in. And we trained out in the UFC Performance Center. And Francis was a lovely big guy, and he spent a lot of time talking to us and taking photographs and stuff. But I got a photograph with him, and I put my arm around him. And do you know the muscles that run down the back each side of your spine? Can't remember the name of them. But I literally gripped one with the whole size of my hand. Like he's a monster of a man. I couldn't believe the size of him.
Yeah, he is a beast. He hasn't fought in a while now, and he's coming off of knee surgery, and he's no spring chicken as well. So I think a lot of people are anxious. You know, there were two big free agents in MMA. One, Francis Ngannou, the other one, Nathan Diaz. And I think a lot of people were wondering, you know, who would strike first. Both of them interested in boxing. We found out last week, Nathan Diaz, Jake Paul, somewhat of a shocking left turn because it seemed like Diaz was going to fight Logan Paul. So I think now there's a little bit of pressure on Francis to make something happen and not lose momentum from when he left the UFC in January.
Is it too much of a stretch? Because we know UFC fighters have good boxing skills, you know, good stand-up game. Is it too much of a step for maybe some boxers to try and step into the octagon? Or is it just such a complex sport that it would be too much of a jump?
It's too. I'm gonna answer that now. It's too much of a step. It's okay, and this is why you always have the UFC guys and the MMA guys come into boxing rather than the other way around, because it just doesn't work. We obviously the MMA guys they can all box a little bit, and some better than others, but there's so much technical difficulties in MMA. If you try to put a boxer who's learned how to punch, never kicked, never grappled, never wrestled, if you put him in the octagon or a cage somewhere, I'm saying this as a boxer, it doesn't end well.
No, and we saw it once. The most famous example was James Toney in 2010 when he fought Randy Couture, and he didn't even know how to tap. Like, that's how, you know, fish out of water he was. He was just like tapping the air. He was so confused about that. So, look, everything is different, right? It's so much harder. And the MMA fighters don't fare very well when they cross over, but it's even harder for the boxer to cross over. Everything from, you know, like your stance to the foot movement to all the different things that you have to deal with, takedowns, knees, elbows, all that stuff and more. But you could even boil it down to this. Like, if I'm an orthodox fighter, my left foot is forward, right? If I'm an orthodox wrestler, my right foot is forward. And so even that alone changes, right? Like in wrestling, it's completely different, the stance. And so that's why you see so many more MMA fighters changing stances freely as opposed to boxers and having success doing so, kicks, all that stuff. So, I don't think that you'll see a lot of big name boxers. You know, there's a reason why Tony, you know, was over the hill when he done it, and no one else has tried since. It's too hard.
The biggest name in the YouTube boxing, influencer boxing scene is Jake Paul. We mentioned that Nate Diaz fight. It was a bit of a left turn, as you mentioned, but how do you see that fight going? Because Nate has often been touted as the boxing guy within UFC.
As you mentioned, he has touted himself as like one of the best, if not the best boxers in the UFC, has sparred the likes of Andre Ward throughout his entire career. And Andre speaks very highly of his boxing skills as well. Jake's back is against the wall. I think if he loses this, you know, there's maybe just one fight left for him, and that's KSI. And who knows if there's going to be a ton of interest, even if he gets, you know, if he gets starched in this one, is there going to be a ton of interest? And even for Nate, there's a lot of pressure on his shoulders, not just the size, not just the fact that he hasn't had an official boxing fight in his entire life, a pro bout. I mean, he's got a lot of pride. He's got a ton of pride. If he loses to the guy who just lost to Tommy Fury, with all due respect to the YouTuber, to the Disney kid, it's going to be a tough pill for him to swallow, going back to Stockton with that loss on his record in his debut. So I think both guys are going to bring it. I think we're going to see a very good version of both guys. I just wonder about not boxing before for Diaz, the size difference as well. And I wonder for Paul, like, where he's at mentally coming off that loss. Does he still have that fire, or once he's tasted defeat, has the kind of fire to remain undefeated and be this guy who's going to fight Canelo? Has that gone away as well?
Carl, I know you're not the biggest fan of the so-called YouTube boxers, so close your eyes while we run this VT. But this is what happened when Tommy Fury fought Jake Paul and got his hand raised with a victory.
Tommy TNT Fury. The biggest win of Tommy Fury's young career. The grudge match is won by Tommy Fury. Jake Paul beaten for the first time. Look at him celebrating. It means so much to Tommy Fury.
What did you make of that fight, Ariel?
You know, it was a solid fight. It was a solid show. I enjoyed it. I think I didn't have the highest expectations, right? Like I wasn't expecting world-class fighting. And so I think some people who don't watch boxing week in and week out are like, oh gosh, these guys are making so much noise. They're so popular. Let me sit back and watch. And they were like, that wasn't exactly what I was expecting. I wasn't expecting Spence Crawford. I wasn't expecting something like that. And so it was what I thought it was going to be. I thought the right man won. I thought Tommy just stuck to the game plan and kept it simple.
You know what? You had, I guess, what turned out to be a brilliant world title fight between Badou Jack and Ilunga Makabu that was relegated to the undercard of Fury versus Jake Paul. Is that the way that the sport is going? And do we have to embrace it?
I don't think Badou Jack has any problems with that as well. They got their shine. They got their moment. To me, this is the thing that I always say. They're not taking anyone's spot. They're creating spots, right? Look at what happened to Amanda Serrano when she teamed up with Jake Paul. Look at a young guy like Ashton Silve, who's part of MVP now, and they're taking him under his wing, and I suspect will fight on this Nate Diaz card as well. It isn't like, let's say Nottingham Forest, my favorite club, signed an influencer and put him in the starting 11. He would be taking someone's slot. And I'm not talking about Jesse Lingard, of course. I'm talking about an actual influencer. Just kidding, Jesse. I love you. The point is, there's an actual number of slots, right? There's a quota. In boxing, there's no quota. You could have 1,000 cards. You could have 1,000 fights on a card. And so to me, as long as they're creating other slots for other people, it's all good. There's no harm, no foul. They're fighting people who are at their level, who, they're not getting killed in there. They're not getting totally embarrassed in there. I really don't have a problem with it. I only think that they're raising the awareness and making the spotlight of boxing bigger.
I want to go off topic here a little bit, Ariel, because you just mentioned Nottingham Forest. And I've watched their podcast from time to time, and I see a Forest badge, their crest, on your kind of bookshelf or whatever it is. What's the connection with Nottingham Forest?
Oh, I'm so happy you asked, Carl. I mean, my dear Nottingham Forest, tough times, not going to lie. I'm a little bit nervous about this whole relegation situation. But the truth is, I was a bit of a free agent. If we really want the truth, Molly McCann, Meatball Molly, made me she kind of forced me to become an Everton fan, right? And to be nice, I adopted Everton as a club, but I never really liked them or felt a connection with them. I wasn't a big fan. I never even watched a single game of theirs. And so this summer, my boys are really into soccer. They adore football. And we decided we need to pick a squad. And I was looking at all the teams, and I love the Forest logo, and I love the Forest story. 23 years, and then I started reading about Brian Clough and all the legends over there, and they finally get promoted. And I said, this is my team. And then I just so happened to be in the UK in late August, because I was there to cover WWE for BT Sport. And I went to Man City Forest, and the club presented me with my own kit. They made a whole presentation outside Etihad Stadium, and I was like, oh, now I'm all in. And people joke, and they don't believe that I'm all in. I'm telling you guys, I watch every single match, beginning to end. Look at this. I want to show you something right here. I have a kit signed by the entire club that they sent to me. I am all in. I watched everything. Brennan Johnson is my favorite. Morgan Gibbs White, I could tell you all about them. Stevie Cooper, the man. But it's tough sledding these days, Carl. I have fallen in love with this team. And people have asked me, am I going to stick around? Am I going to still be on the bandwagon if they get relegated? 1,000%. I'm all in. I got my EFL championship schedule. I'm in. But I want them to stay up, and they've had a lot of chances. So that's the story, really. I have fallen in love with this team and this club and the city ground and the fans and the history. I just don't want them to get relegated. But if they do, for the record, I will stick around.
Right, Errol, between supporting Nottingham Forest and these big fights not getting made, it's going to be a tough few months coming up. But while we're here, let's keep it happy. And I want to know your top 5 pound-for-pound heavyweight fighters in the world. Let's go.
Oh, okay, we're just sticking to heavyweight, right? So I'm going to go with Fury 1, Usyk 2. I'm going to go Deontay 3. Putting me on the spot here. AJ. I'll I'll go AJ 4, and I know that might be controversial. AJ below Wilder, and do we go with Dubois or do we go with Zhang? What do you think? What do you think, Carl? Do I go with that? I'm going to give a shout out to Dubois.
I would say Zhang because of the way he beat Joyce, and I think he should have got the nod over Hrgovic as well.
Okay, fine. All right, you sold me. I'm going with Zhang. So in conclusion, Fury, Usyk, Wilder, just because I know Joshua lost to Usyk, and so that might not be fair to put him. But I'll go with Wilder, and then I'll go with Joshua, and then I'll go with Zhang. What do you think?
I think that's my top 5 as well.
Oh, nice. I love it.
There we go.
Okay,
We're
great.
winning.
Yeah, you've predicted my question to you, Carl. Fantastic. That's all we got time for. Unfortunately, it's been another fantastic show. Thanks, as always, to Carl Frampton. Of course, Ariel, it's been a pleasure. And at last, but not least, Alex Krasiuk as well. I hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll catch you next time on Chatterbox.